Hello and welcome to The Wandering. Today we're going to talk about an amazing story. This is a story of a Catholic priest that was martyred by the government. His name was San Rodrigo Aguilar Aleman. I have a personal connection to this story because it actually happened in my grandparents' hometown of Ejutla in the state of Jalisco in Mexico. I think there's a lot of important lessons that we can learn from the story, which is why I thought it was important to make this video. So go ahead, grab your favorite drink, your favorite snack, and join me today on The Wandering. This story that I'm about to tell you is well documented. There is a little bit of speculation, I will admit, because there are some things that we don't have documentation for, but I'm going to show you some pretty powerful circumstantial evidence. We're going to go way back into history, into the 1300s. There was this group called the Knights Templar. What they were warrior monks. They wanted to claim Jerusalem for the church. At that time, Jerusalem was ruled by Muslims, and so they set out to fight various wars against the Muslims that were ruling Jerusalem at the time. They also wanted to make it so that pilgrims from Europe could travel to Jerusalem and do a spiritual pilgrimage to the Holy Land safely. Back in those days, travel like that was very dangerous. They were also after a variety of artifacts, so they were searching for the Holy Grail, Ark of the Covenant, things like that. Some think that they actually did get a hold of some of these relics. What ended up happening was, over the years, they ended up setting up the first international banking system. If you lived in France, you would deposit your money with them. They would give you documentation, and then you could travel to the Holy Land without a ton of money because it was very dangerous. People would get robbed on the way. So that when you would get to Jerusalem, you would show them your documentation, they would provide you your funds, and then you could continue on your pilgrimage. Well, what ended up happening is they realized pretty quickly that not everybody needs their money at once, so they could loan out the money and collect interest on those loans. And they actually became very, very wealthy. The Catholic Church accused them of worshiping an idol. This idol was called Baphomet. You can see a picture of Baphomet here. What I want you to focus on here is Baphomet's forehead. So that symbol that you see on his forehead is a pentagram. This is used widely in occultism. On a Friday the 13th in 1307, the Templar leadership was actually burnt at the stake. And so what happened after that is they ended up going underground. So some folks say that the Templars became Freemasons, and some in Freemasonry would say this too, that they actually descended from the order of the Knights Templar. Freemasonry is basically a global fraternity. They have various rituals and they talk with a lot of symbolism. They ended up becoming a very powerful organization. Back in 2006 to 2011, I worked for this organization based in Washington, D.C. And though I worked on the West Coast, I would actually travel to D.C. a few times a year. So on one of those trips, smartphones had just kind of started coming around. And back in those days, we didn't have Uber. So what we would do is we would hire a shuttle. There would be several different people in the shuttle. And so it'd pick you up at the airport. And then one by one, it would drop everybody off at their destination. So one time, it was late at night. I pull out my phone and I was like, I wanted to see where I was. I was staying near the White House. And so I pull up a map. It tracks my location. It shows me where I'm at. And I cannot believe my eyes. When I look at the map, you can see the streets here. What symbol do they make? They make a pentagram. And right at the tip of that pentagram is the White House. And I was shocked. I had never seen this before. I had never learned about this in school. I was like, wow, well, it makes sense. Why? Because we know who founded Washington, D.C. It was a lot of Freemasons. And actually the guy who designed Washington, D.C., his name was Pierre Charles L'Enfant. And he was a Freemason, although he wasn't very high up in Freemasonry. But who appointed him? George Washington. George Washington, the first president of the United States, was actually pretty high up in Freemasonry. So this is pretty powerful circumstantial evidence to me that whoever the people were the Templars that survived, if they integrated into Freemasonry, I think we can pretty safely say that they didn't veer very far from their beliefs. The Freemasons, the way they communicate is through symbolism. So symbols are very, very important to them. So we need to take this in consideration as we're moving along in our story here. So let's fast forward to 2021, or it was 2022, I'm not sure, but one of my family members ended up having to go just outside of Mexico City for a special treatment that was only offered there. I had never been to Mexico City, and growing up in Guadalajara, that's Chilangolandia. You know, I never never wanted to go there. It seemed like a place that was very busy. There's about 20 million people that live in that area, so never seemed appealing to me, although friends would go and say that it was absolutely amazing. I didn't think I would like it, but I ended up there because of the situation with the family member. And let me tell you, I ended up falling in love with Mexico City. It's actually a beautiful place, and it was weird when I got there. Rather than feeling chaotic, I actually felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging, which is something I didn't expect. It was weird. But here's me in front of the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan. So it was a quick trip. I was only there for a weekend, really. Right before I left, I wanted to burn some time, so I was staying near Parque de Chapultepec. It's kind of Mexico City's version of Central Park, and in the middle of this park is this massive castle. It's served a variety of different purposes over the years. It was actually a very famous place in Mexican history. It's where the story of the Niños Héroes took place. So I went there. It actually, nowadays, it's a museum. So they had various exhibitions. And as I'm walking through it, what do I see? You can see the picture here. This is a picture from the actual exhibition, but it's an exhibition about Freemasons in Mexico. Now, in American history, we learned that a lot of the founding fathers were Freemasons, but never once did anybody mention that most of the Mexican presidents were also Freemasons. It turns out that almost every single Mexican president, all the way up to Vicente Fox in 2000, was a Freemason. And so, as you can imagine, the reason why I'm talking about, or the reason why I started talking about the Templars in the 1300s was because those people who descended from that movement had quite a bone to pick with the Catholic Church. So Mexico had this dictator. His name was Porfirio Diaz. Porfirio Diaz is like one of the tyrants of Mexican history. But actually, if you start to research and learn about him, what you'll find out is that he actually did a lot to modernize Mexico. Still, there were some people that weren't happy. And so what ended up happening was the Mexican Revolution. After the revolution, Plutarco Elias Calles became the president. He was a Freemason, and he hated the Catholic Church. So he actually passed this law called Ley Calles, and the official name of the law was something like the Law of Religious Tolerance or something like that. Anyways, it was anything but about religious tolerance. Actually, what this law did was outlaw the Catholic Church in Mexico. So what happened over his presidency is the Mexican army moved around Mexico and they killed priests. They destroyed a bunch of artifacts at various churches all over Mexico. And what ended up happening was there was an uprising. Obviously, you can imagine it's not a stereotype. Mexico is very, very Catholic. And so people rose up and they ended up fighting against the government. So I have this book. It's called El Monasterio de Ejutla. In the town of Ejutla in Jalisco, there is a monastery. It's run by the Adoratrices Perpetuas del Santísimo Sacramento. So in this book, they actually talk about the martyrdom of San Rodrigo Aguilar Aleman. It actually happened on Friday, October 28th in 1927. About 1,500 soldiers came into Ejutla. They were looking for the priests and the nuns. All of the priests and the nuns had escaped except for one. The one that was left behind was priest Rodrigo Aguilar Aleman. The Mexican general's name was Juan B. Izaguirre, and he rounded up Rodrigo and took him into the town square. And there's a mango tree in the town square. They threw a rope over it, tied it around San Rodrigo's neck, and asked him who lives. Now the answer they were looking for was the supreme Mexican government. But San Rodrigo didn't give that answer. He said, "Long live Christ the King and Our Lady of Guadalupe." Of course, they didn't like that. So what they did was they pulled him up. and let him hang for a little bit, and then they brought him back down. General Juan B. Aguilar said, "I'm going to give you another chance. Who lives?" Of course, he was expecting San Rodrigo to say the supreme Mexican government, but he did not. He said, "Long live Christ the King and Our Lady of Guadalupe." So for a second time, they pulled him up, brought him back down, and by this time, San Rodrigo was kind of messed up. They knew he wouldn't survive a third hoisting, so they asked him again, "This is your third and last time. Who lives?" And San Rodrigo responded, "Long live Christ the King and Our Lady of Guadalupe." They hoisted him up for the last time, except this time they didn't bring him down. They let him hang overnight into the next morning. In 2015, I got the proverbial call that every Mexican American will get in their life, and that is insert the name of ex-relative is about to pass away. So you need to get on a plane and say your last goodbyes. So I got that call. My grandmother was not doing well. And so my dad and I hopped in a plane and we went to Guadalajara to visit her and say our last goodbyes. Here is a picture of her during our trip. By this time, I had known about this story about San Rodrigo, and I asked her about it. I asked her if she knew San Rodrigo. She said no, that he had passed away before she was born. But when they pulled him down from the rope, one of the books talks about this, they actually buried him in a shallow grave. Years later, they actually disinterred him. My grandma said that she was there when they disinterred him, and what she said next would shock me. She said that they disinterred him, and without skipping a beat, without looking at me to see what my reaction would be, she said when they disinterred him, his body was intact. Now, it had not decomposed. It was almost as if he was sleeping. Now, I was kind of shocked by this because, I don't think she was making it up. This is a teaching of the Catholic Church, that one of the requirements to be a saint, or one of the things that happens to saints commonly, is that their bodies do not decompose. So I was absolutely shocked by that. I thought it was that was amazing that she said that. The same story I told you about San Rodrigo is actually documented in several of these books. So there's no speculation. There's no, I haven't been hanging out on a dark corner of Reddit reading conspiracy theories. Almost everything that I've talked about today is based on well-documented facts. And there is a little bit of, yes, circumstantial evidence, but that circumstantial evidence is pretty powerful. In the spring, my dad and I are actually going to take a trip to Guadalajara. We're going to go to Ejutla, and we're going to show you all the sites that we've been talking about. The adoratrices have a lot of objects that were damaged by the soldiers when they martyred San Rodrigo. So we're going to see if maybe we can get some footage of those things. I think it's a story that goes to show that we always need to be able to keep the government accountable, because if Catholicism can be outlawed in Mexico, that sets a very dangerous precedent for a lot of crazy things to happen in the world. So I look forward to you tuning in to when we take our trip to Mexico this spring. It's going to be an awesome trip, and hope that everybody will come along. Thank you for watching today on The Wandering.